So today I thought we'd have a look at rainbows. We see lots of rainbows not only in the sky now, but we see them in people's windows. We see them painted on stones on the side of the road. And I thought it would be quite nice to do a rainbow in fabric. So I had a wee think about it and decided that the easiest way to do it was to make up strips of fabric and then cut it and join it to make the rainbow. Clearly, once you've made the actual rainbow, you can do all sorts of things with it. You can put it, as I've done here, onto a cushion. You could have it on a bag, a little shopping bag, or you could make it into a wall hanging. You could also make it into a doorstop. You could do two, or you could just have, and then put a welt in between and put the weight in the middle. Or just as I've done here, a little cushion. So we'll give it a go. With this, you do have to be careful with your cutting and your measuring. If you want things to match together, you have to be accurate in your cutting and in your sewing. So that's something that you absolutely have to look out for. If it's not right, take it out and do it again. So to start the rainbow, the first thing you need to do, of course, is select your 5 colours of fabric. So you'll all remember it's red, yellow, green, blue and violet. I've used plain fabrics. If you've got fabrics with a bit of pattern on it, I think that would work just as well, just as long as the main colour is the colour that you want it to be, the red or the yellow. So that's the first thing we're going to do. Select our fabric and then we're going to cut it into strips. Now we need the strip to be 30 inches long for this particular size of rainbow that I'm doing. So cut your strips and they're going to be cut at 1.5 inches wide. Just checking there. So you're going to cut all your strips of fabric 1.5 inches wide. You have all the different bits ready, and then what we're going to do is stitch them all together. And here I've got a piece here that I've stitched, as you can see. So when you're stitching strips like this, it's a good idea to stitch this way the first seam, the next seam come from the bottom up, the third seam come down. You with me? So you alternate the direction of sewing. Once you've stitched them all together, you then press them, and I decided that I'd rather have them pressed flat. You could have them all going to one side, but I think in this occasion I'd like them flat. So your strips of fabric, 1.5 inches wide by 30 inches long, and join them all together and give them a really good press. So there we are. All our 5 pieces are all stitched together and all well pressed, so that's fine, and they've got to be at least for this size 30 inches long. So I'll leave that to one side. Next thing I need to do is decide how many pieces I'm going to have to make the rainbow, and I've decided for this size that 6 pieces are about right. So I know that, in fact, this is, if you're homeschooling, this is a good project you could get your son or daughter to work out for you, but I'll tell you anyway. So we know that's 180 degrees across, straight across there. That's what a line is, 180. And I'm going to divide it into 6, which means that each piece has got to have 30 degrees here. And the way that that sounds terribly technical, but actually it's really easy. So piece of A4 paper, I've drawn a straight line along the bottom, just random up, just so I can mark underneath it. And I'm then going to draw my 30 degrees. So that first line will be 30, that will be 60, that will be 90, and the same the other way. And the way that I find the angles is I take either my little square, or you've probably all got a ruler, and I don't know if you can see here the lines that give you the angles. So you've got 30 degrees, 45 and 60 generally, and then 90 of course is just the straight edges. I'm going to use the little square just because it's easier to draw around. So we shall start over here, and I'm going to, there's my 30 degree line, hopefully you can see, and I'm going to put that line on the straight line that I've already got drawn. So I've got my 30 degree line along here, and I've got the edge in the middle part, and then I'm going to take my pen and draw that line. Now I could do 30 degrees from that to the next line, but it makes it easier to check that you're doing it correctly if you do the 60 degrees. So there's my 60-degree line. So I lay that on there. I should find that my 30-degree line is under the 30-degree line, and then I take my pen and draw that one. And then I will draw my 90 degrees, which is there, and then I'll do exactly the same this side. So I now have my 6 pieces all with 30 degrees here. So we have our 6 pieces all drawn out. So the next thing we need to determine is how long they need to be. And we know how long they're going to be because we have our strip of fabric that we can measure. And if you think the strip of fabric is going to sort of go like that, then it's a straight line across there that we want. So although this measures 4 7/8 inches, I'm actually going to measure along 5 inches. So measure 5 inches and make a little mark. Measure up the next line and make a little mark, and then you're going to draw a line between these two. Once you've done that, you're then going to cut your piece out. So the piece that you've got ready to cut out, which I've just done magically, this is your pattern piece. But the important thing to remember with your pattern piece is there are absolutely no seam allowances on there. So when we come to lay it on our fabric, and we're going to put the top edge along there like so, we must remember to allow for our seam allowances. So I can just shuffle that along a little bit. So you can see I've allowed at the top there, there's my pointing stick, there we are, an extra little bit. So the next thing I'm going to do is take my little ruler, lay it on top, and I'm going to ensure that my 1/4 of an inch line is on the edge of the paper pattern. Oops, and I'm way off at the bottom. There we go. You then take your cutter and, as always, cut away from you and bleed away. This bit is an interesting little shape which you could perhaps use for something else, but not for this project. So that goes in the bin for this one. Next thing you will do is move your ruler and do another 1/4 of an inch on this side, and you need to do that 6 times. So I will continue doing that. So we now have our 6 pieces all cut, and the next thing we're going to do is stitch them together. It's really nice if you can get your seams to line up, and the way that you can do that is when you put the pin, so I've laid my 2 right sides to right sides of 2 of them. When I put the pin in, I've put it in, don't know if you can see, basically between the 2 bits of fabric, and it should come out in exactly the same place on the other side between the 2. And in fact, when you put the pin in, you can generally you can feel that it's gone through nothing, so to speak. That's one. I will do the next one. So again, you can feel as it goes through, and it comes out through on the back in the same place. I would put another couple of pins in there, making sure that they all line up properly. I would do them in pairs, so you'll have 3 pairs to do. So take all 3 and stitch, and then come back and we'll press them all. Now, with all your pairs stitched together, just trim that wee random thread off, and pressed, so you'll have 3 sets of pairs, and you're going to put the 3 pairs together, and you will end up with this. and again you will press it all so it's all nice and flat on the back. Now at the beginning you would have decided exactly what you wanted to do with your rainbow. There's lots of options you can do. You could either put it onto a cushion front, you could use it on the front of a bag, you could make it into a little wall hanging. But basically that's your rainbow. I am going to continue and put it onto possibly a cushion front or a bag front. So I'll show you how to do that next. So the next thing we're going to do is do a bit of applique and put it onto our cushion front. This is a cushion front, it's a rectangular cushion. And if you have some lightweight iron-on interfacing, so it's got adhesive on one side, the rough side, I would put that on the back, and then we're going to position it in the middle or wherever you wish. And then the next thing I would do is put in a few pins just to hold that in place. If you've got a double-sided iron-on, you could of course use that, and in an ideal world that's probably what I would suggest, but if you don't have any, that's fine. Just use some something to stop it stretching a little bit. What I'm going to do is actually remember one of these little scrappy bits? I'm going to use this as a wee example because I'll use contrasting threads and you can see exactly what I'm going to do. So I'll put this onto a piece of fabric and I'll come back in a second. So here we are. I took one of our little triangular pieces. I used some of the iron-on interfacing and ironed it on the back, which gave it a much firmer feel. I've pinned that on to my scrap of fabric, and the very first thing I did, and hopefully you can see, is down this, well I did it all the way around, but the first thing I did was a zigzag. So quite a narrow zigzag and not very far apart. So the setting for my machine was 1 and 1, one width and one stitch length. Your machine may very well be different. So it's just quite a narrow little zigzag around the edge, on the edge, to hold it on. Once I've gone all the way around, the next thing I started doing was a satin stitch. Now a satin stitch is just a zigzag, but it's really close together. So I altered the width and made, in this case I made it 3.5 on my machine width, and the stitch length was 0.5. So it's actually really tight together and a bit wider so that it covers your first row of zigzag. And you can see I've gone round some of it. Obviously I would need to finish it now if it was a real project. So I will now go to the rainbow, and I now need to decide what colour I'm going to use. Obviously if I use a white, it will absolutely stand out. I don't want it to do that, I just want it to go into the background. So I'll probably use a red on here and then maybe a grey across the bottom, or I could use the grey all the way around. Either or works. So there we are, all stitched round. I've used a grey in the end rather than swapping colours around. The idea is that you shouldn't really see the stitching, which hopefully you don't. The one thing I did do, which I didn't say, was a wee sample one, is you can use a backing fabric which you can buy. It's generally called tearaway or something like that. Basically it's paper. If you don't have it, use a bit of paper. Light paper. It's really just to stop any distortion when you're stitching. It's not necessary on a slightly heavier fabric, but if you're using cotton it might just be worth doing. And that's why you should always do a wee sample bit to work out your stitch length, your stitch width, and how your fabric's going to react. So there we are, front done. Now we'll need to decide what we're doing for the back. So there we are, cushion done. So that's the front. Hopefully you can see reasonably well. And for the back, I decided to do a wrap over, and at the bottom you can see here the strip of fabric. So that's it, just a wrap over cushion. If you feel that you need something to hold the fold over together, you could clearly use buttons, or you could use these little poppers. So if I just position them on. So it's not very easy to show you, but you could, if you want, put a row of poppers down there just to finish it off. But I think it looks quite nice with this down in the bottom. The one thing to remember if you're doing this is that the bottom piece, you need to, instead of cutting it your 1.5 inches, you need to cut it 1 3/4 inches, because you have 1/2 inch seam allowance as opposed to everywhere else you've got 1/4 inch. But other than that, one cushion done.